So we'll come back in a few minutes for questions, but for now, please welcome, of course, our next speaker, David Pullan. David.
So just to give you a little bit of context, I manage the global relationship for Mindshare with Unilever. So we manage all of their media investments across 36 countries, investing just over 2 billion euros a year of their marketing money. Across all media, so traditional, digital, and everything in between. But also, my background includes quite a long stint in magazine publishing. I worked for EMAP in the UK, and also in television. So I've seen both sides of this particular game. So now that Layla's kind of laid out the context and some of the big dynamics that are working, what I wanted to try and do is to give you a framework to help you think about how brands are actually operating in this new world. And I think you can identify 5 different ways that brands are approaching what we can call the content game. Branded utility, branded entertainment, branded curation, branded facilitation, and branded movement. And the reason why brands, I think, feel that they have an opportunity to play quite aggressively in the content game is what we call the 1-9-90 rule. So this is pretty much consistent across markets. If you look at content online, approximately 1% of the user base actually creates content. You may have seen all those statistics that YouTube talk about how many hours of content are uploaded daily onto the YouTube platform. But a lot of it isn't original. A lot of it is provided by brands. A lot of it is provided by media owners. A lot of it is reposting of content from other areas. So only 1% of users are actually originating material. 9% of users edit material. So they might recreate it, they might change it, they might adapt it. But they're actively involved in at least content recreation, if not origination. And then it's still the case that 90% of users in digital channels are actually only ever watching. They're passive consumers of content. They don't actually get involved in creation or recreation. So because there is still an opportunity for brands to be part of the origination part of the content chain, I think you're starting to see across many markets across the world, brands becoming quite aggressive in how they operate in this space. So let me just quickly give you one example for each of these categories to help you understand kind of where I'm coming from with this framework. So Nike is the king or queen, I'm not sure which way around it is, of branded utility. So Nike is all about creating something that's of specific value to their consumers. Of course, it helps Nike because they're in a category where they can segment their audience quite specifically around passion points. You know, you might be a skateboarder, you might be a basketball player, you might be a runner. But what Nike is very, very good at doing is to provide either a technology platform or a piece of content or a product that provides specific utility to consumers in those markets. Nike Plus, which is the example here, is a brilliant example of this. So this is all about utility to the consumer. Content wrapped around, in this case, a technology product, the Fuel Band. But there's lots of other examples where Nike just does this on the basis of content alone. The second example, the second category, if you like, of how brands are playing the content game is branded entertainment. So this is the one that you're probably most familiar with. The example I've used here is actually one that we worked on with Unilever. So in Turkey, you can't advertise to children. It's against the law. So there is a character called Max the Lion who was created as part of the global brand for one of the ice cream brands, which is called Paddle Pop. So in Turkey, what the team did was they actually created an animated series for Max the Lion, which ran on television and caught on. And obviously, from a commercial perspective, it's a fantastic way to sidestep the regulations on advertising to children. So this was genuine content. This was a full-scale animated TV series. But in fact, it was so popular that it was then turned into a movie. So Max Adventures was actually a fully blown animated movie that was released theatrically last year in Turkey. It was in the first 3 weeks in the cinema, it was in the top 10 nationally in Turkey in terms of cinema attendance. And most remarkably, and thankfully we aren't asked to do this all the time, it actually made a profit. So this was a piece of branded content, branded entertainment, that actually made money for Unilever. Nearly €1 million of net profit after all the costs were taken into account. So this is clearly an extreme example where something is so successful that it actually becomes a money generator for the brand owner. But it just shows you that branded entertainment can increasingly connect with audiences and can be distributed across a number of different platforms, from digital to traditional. In fact, this year, this will be of interest to this audience, Max is actually becoming a magazine in Turkey. So there's a children's magazine which is just about to launch. The character has been licensed to a local publisher, so it now lives on a whole new traditional media platform. So the next category I talked about was branded curation. So this is where a brand provides a platform and chooses which content it pulls from around the web and it aggregates it for its target audience. This is Pepsi Pulse. If you haven't looked at it, I recommend you go and have a look. Pepsi Pulse is effectively a youth culture barometer. So it's a platform that sucks in information from lots of other platforms, including Twitter and Facebook and mobile web. And it basically is a way of showing to the Pepsi consumers what's hot. But it works globally. Now, what's interesting about this is it's a great service. Clearly, at the core of it, there is some Pepsi content, but a lot of it is not Pepsi content. It's material that they're pulling in from other sources. And this isn't new in the magazine business. I mean, when I worked with FHM 10 years ago, FHM.com was the biggest men's website in Europe, and 90% of the content was not originated by the editorial team. It was aggregated. So this isn't a new model, but brands are trying to own this space increasingly for their target audiences, which I think is something that you particularly need to be quite worried about. Clearly, there are downsides to doing this. You have to be very careful about control. I don't know how many people in the room saw recently Heineken got into a lot of trouble because in their curated portal, they sucked in a piece of content. It's called scraping, where you scrape it off the web based on certain keywords or certain images. And they'd sucked in a piece of content from Thailand, which had Heineken logos, and it turned out to be an illegal dogfight in a bar which was full of Heineken logos. And it got massive publicity, because here was Heineken supposedly sponsoring an event where dogs get killed. Now, clearly, it was automatic. Their machine-based learning had scraped that piece of content off the web because it recognized the logos. So you have to build in some controls in order to ensure reputational damage does not occur. The next category I talked about is branded facilitation. This is where the brand creates an opportunity for its community of users to do something that they want to do. So here's an example, the Harley Owners Club. So Harley Owners Group, or HOGS, obviously, as they're called. And what Harley-Davidson has done brilliantly is to recognize that they have a community around their brand which is very passionate, and they've created an online and offline environment for those users to meet, to share material, to share video, photographs, information about their bikes, and then to meet and to go on rides together. So this is where the brand is facilitating something where its users, they know their users are already wanting to do, but then the brand can take the credit. And within that can always also deliver content that's created by the brand as well as by the users. And then the final category, and this in many respects is the toughest one to crack from a brand perspective, is the branded movement. Now, the P&G example you just saw is a really good example of this. The attempt to kind of own mums or moms, as the Americans would say, is a fantastically clever response to the problem of a corporate brand. We have lots of individually strong brands, but a corporate brand that doesn't really mean anything. And it really helped them bring to life their Olympic sponsorship. And I think it was a very successful case study. Dove, which obviously is a Unilever brand, is another example which has very successfully taken a product, soap, which traditionally has very little emotional involvement, soap is soap is soap, and turned it into a movement. The campaign for real beauty is something that I'm sure everybody in this room is aware of. But because the mission underlying the campaign for real beauty is a bigger idea than just old women in ads, they've been able to create all sorts of platforms from this idea. So in America, for teenage girls, they have a thing called the Dove Campaign for Self-Esteem. In Canada, they've done a whole program to encourage women to continue to play sport when they hit their teenage years, where often body issues get in the way of continued participation. So this is a platform that could live in lots of different ways, and the movement will underline the brand for years to come and gives it clearly a point of differentiation in a category that generally is quite dull. So those are the 5 categories to try and help you understand how brands are operating in this space and the different ways they're connecting content with their consumers. But I also think there are a number of keys to content success for brands. Now, the first one is largely you need a category where consumers are likely to have some degree of emotional engagement. There was a great example over the weekend. There's a comedian in the UK called Dave Gorman, and he was talking about Finish dishwasher tablets. And the current Finish TV ad says, "Follow us on Twitter." And he said, "Why?" I mean, why would I follow a dishwasher tablet brand on Twitter? What can they possibly say that's of any interest? So it's very difficult in those kind of environments. For Nike, clearly it's not, because they have a category with deep emotional connection already. But the example of Dove shows you that it can be done, but it does take years and it takes a lot of investment. And most importantly, it takes a massive consistency of delivery, which brands often struggle to do. So that's the first thing. The second key to success in the content game is having a clearly defined community, where you can identify a community that shares something in common, which is quite clearly and strongly defined. It might be a passion, it might be an identity, it might be an ethnicity, it might be a place where they live. But there has to be some edges around the community, because you need to be able to define what they're interested in and how you can deliver that to them. The third thing, and you can see I like doing alliteration, another C, is clarity. So the brand has to have a clear point of view. The brand has to have something to say. The reason why Dove succeeds in the content game is because it has a very clear perspective. And Steve Miles, who runs the Dove brand at Unilever, is incredibly prescriptive about what Dove does do and what Dove doesn't do. And he's the decision maker, and he says yes or no. And part of the reason why it's been so consistently successful is there's one guy who really has his hands around the throat of the brand and really understands what it is and what it isn't. And obviously the fourth one, and I spent hours trying to think of a C word for this, but I couldn't. So distribution. So apologies, it's not quite as neat as it could have been. But clearly, in order for the content game to work for a brand, you have to have distribution. And as Layla was saying, the syndication model increasingly is absolutely crucial. I think it's also worth saying for this audience, if I were you, the one thing I would be most worried about in this is native advertising. Because native advertising is a way of taking branded content in any of these 5 categories and delivering it on your platforms in a way that looks like editorial. And I think, in the US, the regulatory authorities are apparently looking at native advertising quite seriously, because it clearly removes the divide between editorial and advertising in a very, very clear way. But whether it can be regulated or not in the way that magazine business or the newspaper business has kept a very strong distinction between editorial and advertising, I don't know. But we saw a company called Nativo a couple of weeks ago in the US, and what their technology automatically takes an advert or a piece of content, disassembles all of the parts, the logos, the content, the branding, the voiceover, and then it reassembles it in the style of the website where it's going to be served. So they are serving the same piece of content on CNN.com and Maxim.com, and it's all done automatically. So the user of those websites sees something that fits the environment, but do they know if it's advertising or do they know if it's editorial? I think this is a very interesting next phase for the business. Now, Layla was talking about complexity and had that fantastic ecosystem chart. I mean, this is the one that I use because it just brings the point home rather nicely. This is purely the US social TV ecosystem. So every one of these logos is an individual product or service. You can't read the detail, but to go from the top, obviously you've got the general social networks, then you've got metadata suppliers, TV-specific social networks, check-in or incentive-based services, social EPGs, content discovery, remotes, social currency, integration, syndication, and so forth. The point being that this environment is phenomenally fragmented, and the notion that content is just about putting a piece of video on Facebook, those days are gone if they ever existed. So it's a very fragmented space, but everything at its core is social. And this means it creates a new model of opportunity for brands. So in the old world, everybody thought about destination sites. So Recipedia, which is the example I've put up on here, is a Latin American-based recipe service from Unilever. It's a platform. The idea is it would be a platform to host all the recipes in the world for all the consumers in all countries. But when they worked out how much it would cost to deliver this service, it was completely uneconomic. The best-selling app in the UK last year was Jamie Oliver's 30-minute recipe app for the iPhone. And that's an example where fragmentation and social has created a great opportunity. It's a very specific service, specific piece of content serving a specific need. Equally, this example I used to use, Absolute, which was a client I worked with when I was at Isobar. Absolute.com, beautiful website, cost millions. The world's best bars is a microsite that was created by Absolute, the company, and embedded in other people's websites, timeout.com, etc. The traffic to the world's best bars is double the traffic to absolute.com, even though it cost about $50,000 versus literally millions. And Dove is no longer focusing effort on dove.com. It's all about Facebook and where the community is. So what are the implications for magazine brands? Where are there some specific opportunities for you to play in this game? I think there's an opportunity to aggregate unsexy categories. You know, if you're Finnish, dishwasher powder, it's very difficult to create a community with some emotional engagement. However, your business and the brands that you operate quite often have those communities already in existence, and the emotional engagement is created by the relationship that the magazine brand has with those consumers, so you can give them a very easy way in. And leveraging your communities, I think, is your key asset in this space, because you have those long-term relationships based on a very clear delivery and an understanding of what matters to people in those defined communities. But you also have permission. You have permission to engage with them. You have permission to give them content. Clearly, brands are diving into this space, spending a lot of money, effectively trying to go direct to consumers. If I were you, I'd be targeting the brands that have a complementary point of view. To come back to the point about clarity, if there's a group of brands that are closely aligned with the point of view of your magazine brand, you should be proactively targeting them and helping take them to this market. And finally, you need to operate across the full range of this content game, the 5 categories that I've talked about. You need to think about how your brands can work across all those things. How many people in this room have watched Coca-Cola's Liquid and Linked videos on YouTube? Right. If you haven't, please go and watch it. They explain, it's the best articulation of a brand content strategy I think there is. Jonathan Mildenhall, who ironically used to be the account director on the zoo business when he was at Mother Advertising, he's now head of content and creative excellence at Coke. And he's talked about this at Cannes, he's talked about this at the Festival of Media, but all the videos are on YouTube, and it's a brilliant description of how a brand can work in the content space. Liquid means that content can move. It's not stuck on your brand website. It can move from place to place. Consumers can do with it as they will. Linked means that every piece of content links to a bigger story. So even though you can take something in isolation, it's part of a bigger story where all the elements connect. If you haven't watched this, please do. And finally, any piece of content that you create with a brand or for a brand or for your own brand, I think you've got to share the rules of the content game on the social web, which is everything needs to be shoppable, shareable, editable for that 9%. It needs to be actionable, measurable, because then you can understand your return on investment, portable from device to device to device, and obviously it's got to be searchable. Thank you very much.